So a lot of customers who wanted to replicate data across a WAN, or they want to perform sort of messaging or some kind of command pattern where they want to issue commands against a coherence data grid and have those commands executed in a particular sequence, etc. We're receiving a lot of requests for customers. Customers are asking us a lot of times how they should do this. And so what we ended up doing is writing some pre-written pieces of code which are maintained, documented, examples are provided, are production ready, and are thoroughly tested. So if you want to, for instance, implement some kind of messaging pattern using coherence or push replication, then you can take one of these off-the-shelf patterns and just use them and be assured that they've been tested, the best practice has been followed, and you can raise bugs about them. So you can say, well, actually this doesn't work. So a number of these are used by customers in production at the moment. So just go through some use cases briefly, talk about how customers are using coherence. So performance and scalability. Wachovia are using coherence for their data grid, for their compute grid. So at Wachovia they have a lot of servers which perform computations, and they split the computations and spread them across their compute grid. So they have a huge amount of processing power available to them. The bottleneck then becomes data, getting data to the compute grid nodes fast enough. And that's where coherence came in. They used coherence to actually bring the data closer to where the computation was going to occur. So they didn't start, the compute engines in their compute grid didn't start waiting around for the data to arrive. So that reduced their critical computations down from several days to under an hour. So they computate the risk they're exposed to from trading, etc. GEICO, an insurance company, and they had an application which had very large user profiles, over a megabyte, and they were persisting these in the database, but it just didn't scale. Even though they threw more tin at it, it just didn't scale. Now, they could have re-architected their application to reduce the size of their profiles, but using coherence in a tactical way, they were able to put that information into a coherence cache, in-memory cache, and scale their application up. So they basically could open up their application to more users to enable them to perform more operations online to reduce the cost of any processing without actually modifying their application. And at HSBC as well, they used coherence to cache reference information. So they have information, market information, which a lot of their applications need in multiple locations. And they put that information in a coherence cache, and they had two clusters, one in Paris and one in London. So they share the information between those sites, and it enables the applications which are situated in those locations to very quickly access the information and be assured they're getting the latest copy of it. So reducing cost, that's another use case for coherence. It's quite a simple one actually. Companies like Avis, for instance, they use a mainframe, and a lot of customers use legacy systems where they pay for the actual processing they perform. So if you have a mainframe and you pay for the MIPS you use, if you're fetching information from that mainframe repeatedly, then you're going to pay for every time you access the data. If you put that information in a coherence cache and reread it from the cache as opposed to going to the mainframe and just keep it in a cache for a short period of time, you can reduce your number of mainframe MIPS and hence reduce your costs. Another use case that customers used is where they wanted to expose some legacy systems to customers because they provided useful service in a SOA type environment. They weren't able to do it because the systems were never designed to support the load they would be put under. So they used caching to actually cache the responses from these systems for a short period of time to enable them to expose those services externally, because the cache took the load of the increased number of requests. It acted like a buffer to protect these legacy systems. So how have Avis used it? Well, Avis have used it in the first use case I described. Basically, they load up their cache every morning with some of their rental information, and they read the information from the cache rather than going to the mainframe. And they save themselves about $300,000 a year just by using this simple mechanism of caching mainframe data and keeping it there for a period of time and accessing the information from the cache. So a very simple use case, but very effective. And as Coherence can provide a very scalable architecture because you can partition the data, they can pretty much store however much data they needed and be assured that if the data volumes increased, they'd have the capacity to support that. Integrating applications. One of the interesting features about Coherence is that, as I say, you can cache session information, HTTP session information, and because it's held outside of the application server, you can actually have multiple J2E application servers, even different types, accessing the same information. So you can have, for instance, WebLogic server putting the information into an HTTP session and reroute the next request through Tomcat, and it can access the same information held in Coherence. So you can start to modularize applications. Applications which were once large monolithic applications can be segmented or new functionality added as a separate J2E application, and when someone clicks on a link to go to that new feature, they can be directed to another J2E application which can still access the same session information, so it can pull out the account information, etc. GAP uses this to great effect, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but other customers who've used Coherence to cache information which they frequently use in their web application are people like Hotwire, a large travel site, Overstock, who sell stock which is it's basically stock which is left over that needs to be sold. Shopzilla, Abbey Books, they're all online retailers that use Coherence not only for caching session information but also caching other information their web applications use, so they don't have to go to a database every time they need that information. I thought I had a slide on GAP here, but I'll briefly mention how that worked. GAP had 3 sites. They had Banana Republic, GAP, and Old Navy. The problem they had is when GAP acquired those other companies, they had 3 separate websites, and every time you wanted to buy a shirt from one and jeans from another, you effectively had to log out and log into the other one. You couldn't have a single shopping basket, so the customer experience was really poor. So what they did is they used Coherence to unify those 3 different applications by putting the session information in Coherence. Then all 3 web applications could access the session information in the same place. So it knitted together these 3 separate applications and provided a single shopping basket. So when you can shop to 3 different sites and you went to buy the products you bought, you went to one place, provided a much better shopping experience for customers and increased their business significantly. So just to summarize, Coherence delivers data performance and scalability and reliability, provide in-memory performance in terms of accessing your data. We can scale up to very large volumes of data, so even if you start small, you can be assured that if your data volumes increase, we can support that. And we provide a reliable way of storing data in memory, so if a process or a server fails at holding data in memory, Coherence will seamlessly recover from that in the background. Coherence is the leading in-memory data grid. It's been around for about 5 or 6 years now. May not seem long, but in this sort of space, it's relatively long time. And finally, it's a proven technology. We have 200 plus customers and over 1,500 production installations, from some of the biggest banks to some of the largest online retailers. And some of the unique features I've talked about, like transactions, queries, aggregations, really distinguish and differentiate Coherence from some of the, not only our competitors, but also some of the open source offerings. I'd like to take any questions now if anybody has some.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, David. Very interesting and informative session. As we stand at the moment, we don't have any questions that have been raised by any of our delegates today. However, we will be following up with each of the delegates that have attended today. So if there are any questions that are forthcoming thereafter, we will pass those on to you and get some answers back from there.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Well, thanks so much for your time, everybody. I hope it's been informative and useful today. And as Ian says, if you have any subsequent questions, then please